Ever dreamed of being a superhero? When done right, a superhero game can make you feel unstoppable. But let's be honest, most of the time, they fail spectacularly. Today, we're counting down 13 superhero games that are so bad, they'll make you wonder how they ever made it to market. Stick around, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the latest in gaming breakdowns. At number 13, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutants in Manhattan. While they're technically mutants, they're close enough to count as superheroes. This TMNT game, developed by Platinum Games, is nothing like their best titles like Bayonetta. Instead, it's more akin to the Legend of Korra and Transformers. Devastation, but worse. The levels are boring, combat is mindless, and the character designs are off-putting. The trademark combat style is here, but wasted on enemies that barely put up a fight. The whole experience is button mashing through uninspired stages, making it hard to stay engaged. At number 12, we have Catwoman. Back in the day, they'd make a video game tie-in for almost anything. If someone had optioned a Matter Eater Lad movie, EA would have probably snapped up the rights without hesitation. The Catwoman movie from 2004 is famously bad. While it's got some so bad it's funny moments, it's undeniably a poor film. Bad movies usually don't make for good games, and this one is no exception. Imagine Prince of Persia, but clunky, ugly, and awkward, which is especially disappointing since it stars Halle Berry as Catwoman. The game features an unusual combination of combat from that Jet Li game, where you push the thumbstick toward enemies to attack, and platforming that's painfully awkward, with a control scheme that feels alien, like pressing L1 or A1 to jump or climb. The story makes little sense, flipping back and forth in time and jumping to random scenes, making it nearly impossible to follow. However, the game's true focus seems to be on strange close-ups of polygonal body parts. If left idle, the game zooms in on random, blurry textures and stiff animations. In the end, while the movie had real-life Halle Berry, this game has polygonal Catwoman. Moving on to number 11, Thor, God of Thunder. Sega churned out plenty of bad movie tie-ins in the 7th generation, and Thor, God of Thunder is certainly one of them. Essentially a worse version of God of War. The combat here is stiff, the environments are empty and poorly designed, and the animations look half-baked. Unlike God of War, this game isn't a subpar alternative. It's a total disaster. The frame rate is abysmal, with effects popping in and out at random. They did manage to get the actors from the movie, and Tom Hiddleston's voice acting is a surprising highlight, but that's about the only good thing to note. Inon Zur's music is decent, but with everything else being lackluster, even a short playthrough is more of a mercy than a criticism. At number 10, Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. The idea of Spider-Man and the X-Men teaming up is enticing, and with the impressive cover art, every kid was drawn to it at Blockbuster. But upon playing it, they quickly realized it wasn't worth the hype. It's not even a real team-up. Each character has isolated levels with no interaction. The powers of each character are barely functional, and they all die quickly from the weakest enemies. Worst of all, Storm, the Weather Master who can fly, is relegated to a water level with no powers. It's a dark, frustrating experience that fails on all fronts, especially since it sneakily uses the title Arcade's Revenge, which recalls one of the best beaten UPS ever. This game doesn't deserve that association. Number 9 is Batman Forever. This game stands as a warning for anyone who thinks fighting game mechanics belong in a side-scrolling action game. Batman Forever feels like Mortal Kombat on rails, with 4 attack buttons, up to jump, and baffling controls like mapping the grappling hook to the select button. Batman awkwardly shuffles through decent-looking environments, but the clunky combat and big foreground objects that block your view make it frustrating to play. And the controls only get worse. At one point, to grapple up, you don't just press select, you also have to tap up. This game is a confusing mess that only dedicated fans, or those with an instruction manual, could likely get through. And at number 8, Hellboy, Asylum Seeker. Hellboy is a beloved character, but this survival horror game does him no justice. Asylum Seeker is the PlayStation 1 version of Hellboy, Dogs of the Night, released before Guillermo del Toro's movie. The game starts with Hellboy in a graveyard solving basic puzzles and taking on simple enemies, with tank controls that make navigating its 3D environments a chore. The combat is dull, as Hellboy uses a weak little punch instead of his iconic right hand of doom, making the gameplay feel completely off. The game is a bore fest, with dark levels and lifeless puzzles that feel more like a punishment than entertainment. At number 7, we have Iron Man / Exo Manowar in Heavy Metal. The crossover everyone was asking for, or maybe not. Sure, Iron Man's a popular hero, but Exo Manowar? Not so much. The title is the most interesting part of this terrible co-op side-scroller. While the soundtrack is decent, the gameplay is clunky and unresponsive, with Iron Man waddling around like he's got no idea where he is. Maybe he's distracted by the ugly, uninspired levels, or maybe it's just the mindless enemies. There's no dodge mechanic, so you're constantly taking hits without any way to avoid them. The first boss? A trench coat wearing guy who attacks by just getting way too close. Then, as if the game knows it's a joke, his second form simply throws barrels, which is somehow easier to dodge. As for Manowar, he's no better. He just hovers like a clueless fool. Why is he even in this game? Nepotism, probably since the publisher owned the rights. Number 6 is Batman: Dark Tomorrow. Before the Arkham series, Batman games were pretty rough, and Dark Tomorrow stands out as one of the worst. Made by a Japanese studio, it tries to mimic Metal Gear Solid, but the execution is disastrous. The camera is terrible, the controls are stiff, and the levels are bland and forgettable. You're given vague objectives from the start, and it's unclear what you're supposed to do. Using Batman's grapple gun is a nightmare, and the camera constantly shifts while you're swinging, making it impossible to judge distances. In the first hour alone, you'll repeatedly fall to your death. Some people praised the story back then, but honestly, the gameplay is so bad, it's hard to care. At number 5, we have Fantastic Four on PlayStation 1. Yes, there was a PS1 Fantastic Four game, and it is dreadful. This thing has the quality of a student project, with everything looking like gray sludge, from the characters to the enemies. It even has a completely random racing minigame on every loading screen. At first, I thought I'd put in the wrong disc. The actual game is a basic brawler, but it's so clunky and visually hideous that I ended up walking past enemies instead of fighting them. After beating the first boss, you're suddenly teleported to a battle with Dragon Man in a different location. I died, and the game just carried on. It's like a fever dream, but somehow real. Number 4 is the Uncanny X-Men, 1989, for the NES. The NES had its fair share of bad games, but this one stands out as one of the worst. It's a top-down action game where even figuring out what's happening on screen is a challenge. It's like trying to play behind one of those optical illusion pictures. You'll struggle to figure out what you're supposed to do. Enemies and projectiles blend into the background. Everything's a chaotic mess of pixels, and the game is so frustratingly hard. It's almost like the developers wanted to punish anyone who played it. Number 3 is Kick-Ass. Based on the movie, this download-only beat 'em up is one of the worst out there. It makes the Watchmen beat 'em up look like a masterpiece. The combat is as basic as it gets, the graphics are ugly, and the UI looks like a first draft. They threw some cartoon filters on it, hoping to make it look like a comic book, but it doesn't work. The gameplay is a tedious loop. Wander through empty streets, fight dull enemies, repeat. It's not the worst game in terms of technical issues, but it's certainly one of the most forgettable and joyless games to play. It's the type of game that could end friendships in co-op mode. Number 2 is Aquaman: Battle for Atlantis. Before Jason Momoa's Aquaman made a splash, there was this game. And let me tell you, it's one of the most basic, boring experiences I've had the misfortune to play. It starts with terrible comic book cutscenes, clearly rushed due to lack of budget. Once the game begins, the entire loop consists of swimming to a location, beating up bad guys, and repeating. The combat turns into an awkward fighting game mechanic even when surrounded by enemies. The only fun part is summoning sea creatures to attack, but even that's over in a few seconds. There's no real exploration or anything to learn. It barely qualifies as a game. And finally, at number 1 is Superman 64. This is the game that needs no introduction. It's the meme game, the one everyone already knows is awful. And for good reason. It's not just ugly, with its green soup skies and full of tedious flying through ring sections, but it also features random events where you have to do something completely random in 5 seconds with controls you've never been taught. The puzzles make no sense, the combat is shockingly bad, and there are constant glitches. It's like the game is held together with duct tape, ready to fall apart at any moment, which it does often. What makes this game stand out isn't just how bad it is, but how it manages to be bad in so many different ways. It's a terrible beat 'em up, a terrible flying game, a terrible puzzle game, and its graphics are dreadful. It's consistently surprising with how many ways it fails. And that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to do so. We upload new videos every day. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated. Thanks for watching.